Okay, good day, everyone. I believe we're ready to start now. Welcome back to this workshop on tourism statistics organized by the World Tourism Organization jointly by its departments for the Regional Department for Africa and the Department of Statistics at UNWTO. I believe many of you joining us today have already participated also in the session yesterday. But as there are some new participants today, I will go over some of the main organizational points of this workshop before. So this workshop is organized in 2 blocks. We covered the first block yesterday with the session, The Measurement of Tourism for Better Policy. It provided a cursory overview of the importance of statistics, the main elements of tourism statistics, and how they can be used to serve the needs of policy. In the spotlight were topics very important today in our context of pandemic, and these were measuring domestic tourism and the use of big data. We had some very inspiring presentations, including from Lesotho, Nigeria, and also from the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa and the United Nations Statistics Division in New York. Today's block focuses more specifically on the fundamental concepts, data outputs, and production sources of tourism statistics as part of the session, How to Better Measure Tourism. With us today, we have expert statisticians from across the key entities involved in the production of tourism statistics. These are the National Tourism Administrations, the National Statistical Offices, central banks, and even migration and port authorities. My name is Clara Vanderpool, and I am the coordinator of the Statistics Department at UNWTO. It's my pleasure to be your moderator for this workshop. I have been working in the space of official tourism statistics since I joined UNWTO 12 years ago already, and I am still very passionate about the role that statistics can play in improving people's lives by supporting decisions, optimizing policy, and empowering citizenship. Before heading into the introductions, please bear with me for some housekeeping announcements. Speakers, you are kindly requested to keep your cameras on throughout the workshop and your microphones muted throughout the event. You can then unmute on time for your presentations. I encourage everyone to contribute with questions and comments as they come up throughout the event using the Q&A function, please. We also have a designated time for discussion at the end. However, if time allows, I will be covering some of these questions during each item. Please note that all the workshop material, including the presentations and this recording, will be emailed to everyone who registered. Please also note that throughout the workshop, we will be having a series of Zoom polls that will function as a quiz on the substantive issues covered. Responses are completely anonymous and will be subsequently posted in aggregated form in order to help us all learn. And so now it's my pleasure to welcome, for the introduction to the session today, Ms. Elsia Grandcourt. Originally from the Seychelles, Elsia Grandcourt joined the United Nations World Tourism Organization in 2013 as Director of the Regional Department for Africa. Before joining UNWTO, she was the CEO of the Seychelles Tourism Board, and she previously also occupied various positions in the tourism private and public sectors. Ms. Grandcourt, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Clara, and it's my pleasure to join this session again today. As you rightly mentioned at the beginning, we had very exciting session yesterday with some key case studies being presented, and I'm hoping today also will be as dynamic as it was yesterday. So allow me first of all to greet everybody a very good afternoon and good morning from wherever you're connecting. It's so nice to also see familiar faces. I also acknowledge the presence of the 2 experts, Mr. Kevin Millington, as well as Mr. Kappa, who's been working on with us on TSA project, specifically in Seychelles as well. And also a dear friend and colleague that I see from Seychelles who will be presenting the Seychelles case today. And of course, to all the others who have connected, I can see from the different countries, Zambia, to join this session today. Statistics, as we saw yesterday, is not necessarily just to quantify the role and contribution of tourism to the economy and to the society, but it is also essential in the planning and development of physical facilities, in marketing and promotion, and particularly for the restart of our tourism sector, because we all been going through very tough times, and we all need to come together to support each other and see what are the best practices and the best way to move forward. And as you all know, and I mentioned also yesterday, the statistics component is a core priority of the UNWTO Agenda for Africa. And this is why we teamed up with Clara's department in order to be able to prepare this targeted workshop for some specific countries that have joined us for this two-day session. We've had several interventions, as you mentioned, and today again, to hear the experiences. And we will also be looking today at how to better measure tourism, and also looking at both international and domestic tourism, because we know that a lot of countries, since there's been these restrictions of travels from the source markets, they've been looking at developing the domestic sector, and especially in the Africa region, more so the intra-regional travel. And let's hope that with this workshop, we will be able to identify some best practices and continue to share with one another on how best we move forward. So with this, I will end here, and I want to wish everybody a successful workshop. We still remain committed and available to share with you any additional information that you may need. As we go along throughout the workshop, my colleagues will be dropping some key links or documents that you may make reference to in case of need. So once again, I wish everybody a happy workshop. Thank you, Clara.
Thank you very much, dear Elsia, for this excellent introduction, and also for your words of encouragement to all participants working in statistics that are joining us today. Yesterday, one of the issues that came up was that statisticians are in a very difficult situation at the moment, more so perhaps than ever before. Because on the one hand, the request for more timely, more detailed, and more comprehensive statistics is higher than ever. The challenges are also more complex than ever, with the pandemic affecting statistical operations and forcing us to adapt and innovate. On the other hand, however, the resources in statistical entities have not been increased. The solution to this is not easy and may involve elements of political mobilization, stronger collaboration, more effective communication, and clear agreements between entities. But let's focus now on the content. Item 2 of the agenda deals with measuring international tourism. This tends to be an area best covered, or this tends to be the area best covered in tourism statistics generally. And this is not surprising, given the importance of international tourism statistics for marketing strategies, and also the role that tourism has in generating foreign revenue. Now, my dear colleague, Ms. Leandri Moreno, will be introducing this topic to us. She joined UNWTO in 2012 at the Statistics Department, where she has since been involved in promoting conceptual development, implementation, and the utilization of tourism statistics at both national and international levels. She has contributed to statistical capacity building initiatives across Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean. Leandri, you have the floor.
Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be with you all today. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Here we go. I think you can all see it, right?
Yes, all good.
Thank you very much. So as Clara was saying, today what we really want to do is to lay the foundations for a good measurement of, in this session, international tourism. So for that, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the main concepts, definitions, and classification, together with some example of main variables. So let's start with the official documents containing the methodological frameworks for measuring tourism ratified by the United Nations. So we see first the International Recommendations for Tourism Statistics, IRTS. They provide the main concepts, definition, and classifications for the measurement of tourism. They enable the gathering of basic tourism statistics and indicators. Basic tourism statistics are typically those on tourism flows, expenditure, and on the different industries and employment. The other standard, the Tourism Satellite Account Recommended Methodological Framework, goes a step further, as it provides the conceptual framework for the measurement of tourism in economic terms. For example, you can derive tourism direct GDP, and is aligned with the national accounts. Data compiled according to these two frameworks is comparable between countries, group of countries, and over time. The IRTS has also a compilation guide, which offers practical guidance for using sources and methods to compile tourism statistics. In terms of guidance documents, UNWTO has also recently released the conceptual guidance on tourism statistics in the COVID-19 context. For those who were not yesterday with us, this document provides clarifications on the treatment of special cases, such as quarantine stays, COVID-19 related expenditure, treatment of patients and health workers, and activity changes in the tourism industries, for example. So these documents on the left frame the scope of today's workshops. They are available in the UNWTO website. So for this module or session, let's say specifically on measuring international tourism, the objectives are to be able to, at the end, differentiate travel and tourism, identify the main purposes of tourism trips, distinguish between visitors and tourists, differentiate between inbound, outbound, and international tourism, and recognize the available data sources for international tourism. So let's start. Travel and tourism are not the same thing. Travel refers to the activity of a traveler, while tourism refers to the activity of visitor. So who is a traveler? A traveler is someone who moves between different geographic locations for any purpose and for any duration. Who is a visitor? A visitor is a traveler, but taking a trip to a main destination outside his or her usual environment for less than a year and for any main purpose, let's say business, leisure, or other personal purpose, other than to be employed by an entity resident in the country or place visited. So these are the several criteria for a traveler to qualify as visitor. This will be important to keep in mind, notably for the measurement of arrivals in the countries, as not all arrivals will qualify as tourism. In fact, tourism refers to the activities of visitor. And we can understand that it's a subset of travel, and visitors are a subset of travelers. Visitors and tourists are not synonymous terms. A visitor becomes a tourist when he or she makes an overnight stay. A visitor who does not make an overnight stay is called an excursionist. So, in fact, visitors is the sum of tourists and excursionists. And most of the time, a cruise passenger is an excursionist, provided that he or she is not staying inland. So what is the main purpose of a trip? The main purpose of a trip is defined as the purpose without which the trip would not have been taken. Identifying the main purpose of trips helps to determine whether the trip qualifies as a tourism trip, and so the traveler also qualifies as a visitor. Here we can see the classification of the main tourism trips. They are broader than the typical tourism activities such as sunbathing or cruising. Let's have a look at it. The classification of tourism trips according to the main purpose refers to 9 categories. Personal purposes are multiple. We have holiday, leisure, and recreation. So this category typically includes, for example, sightseeing, attending sporting or cultural events, honeymooning, cruising, staying in a vacation home, visiting friends and relatives. This includes, for example, attending weddings, but also funerals, or caring for the sick or old. This could be relevant during the COVID crisis indeed. Education and training. This includes, for example, taking short-term courses or following particular programs of studies or even university sabbatical leaves. Health and medical care. This includes, for example, receiving services from hospitals or clinics, visiting places to receive medical treatments. So in the COVID context, for example, this means that any COVID-infected person traveling or being transferred to receive short-term care from hospitals or medical institutions outside their usual environment will be considered as visitors. And also any person traveling to receive the COVID vaccination. Transit, only those persons making a stop and entering the legal and economic territory should be considered. We have also shopping and religion pilgrimage purposes. And in other, for example, we have volunteer work or investigative work. So what purposes as, business and professional, one important purpose. So this category includes activities of both the self-employed and employees as long as they don't have any implicit or explicit employer-employee relationship in the country visited. So what purposes are not considered tourism and would fall under travel purposes only? We have workers, border, seasonal, short-term or long-term. By long-term here, we mean a year or more. Nomad and refugees, transit passenger not entering the economic and legal territory, cruise on public mode of transports, person entering to establish their residence, long-term students and patients, and other travelers deemed not to enter the economic territory, such as diplomat, consular staff, or military personnel. Now we are going to see the different forms of tourism. So inbound tourism corresponds to the activity of a non-resident visitor within the country of reference. Domestic tourism refers to the activities of a resident visitor within the country of reference. And outbound tourism refers to the activity of a resident visitor outside the country of reference. Something important to bear in mind here is that international tourism does not mean inbound tourism. It means inbound and outbound. It's in the same logic that international trade corresponds to both exports and imports. The difference here in tourism is that the consumer moves and not the products. So we will learn a bit more on domestic tourism in its dedicated session. So for the different international tourism, both inbound and outbound, what do we have to measure? I'm going to show briefly here the main data and indicators that UNWTO compiles annually to ease international comparability. I guess that some of you today will well recognize this series, as most of you are our main data providers. In fact, I take this opportunity to thank you all for providing the data to UNWTO annually. So on inbound tourism, what do we have to measure? The main indicators refers to arrivals, both tourists and excursionists, broken down by region, by main purpose, by mode of transport, by form of organization of the trip. Here, maybe it's important to describe a bit what means package tour. It's in fact a tourism product developed and provided by a tour operator, which sells it directly or through travel agencies to travelers. So travelers on package tours receive a combination of trip products and services, transportation, accommodation, food and beverage, etc. Then we have also accommodation in commercial establishments, broken down by the number of guests and overnight, and a specific on hotels and similar establishments. The item on expenditure will be explained later on in the workshop, so I'm going to skip it. And then we have several indicators. The average size of a travel party, which is defined as visitors traveling together on a trip and whose expenditures are pooled. And indicators on the average length of days in all the commercial accommodation services and also in all hotel and similar establishments, and the average expenditure per day. So concretely, here is an example of how we can compare data on inbound tourism. You can access this map through the UNWTO website, available on the bottom left of the slide. At the national level, I've also taken an example from our colleagues from Mozambique to illustrate the data available. So we can see here the number of arrivals of tourists, the broken down by mode of transport, and by main purpose. For outbound tourism, the main data and indicators relate to the number of departures by resident visitors. So here, broken down again by tourists or excursionists. Again, the expenditure items will be touched upon in its dedicated session. And we have two indicators on the average length of stay and average expenditure per day. So here, in this map, we can compare the data on outbound departure. Again, this map is available on the UNWTO website. At the national level, I have to say that very few countries from this group collect data on departures. Here we can see the example of Mauritius for departures and expenditures. So this was the basic data and indicators on the international tourism used for international comparability. And now we are going to see very briefly a list of possible data sources, but not of all of them, of course. So data sources. For inbound tourism, we can use the sources such as administrative data, as we have seen already yesterday, through the immigration records and through entry and departure cards, transport operator records, such as the SHIP manifest. Of course, the surveys at borders, at accommodation establishments, and at attraction places. Big data, as we have seen also yesterday, through mobile network operators and booking platforms. And for outbound tourism, we can use more or less the same, the immigration records and transport operator records, but also the household surveys and the surveys at borders. So regarding the data sources in general, it's very important to bear in mind some considerations. How reliable are they? Do they have a good coverage or timing issues? Are they census or based on a sample? Are they conducted regularly or irregularly? Are they available on consistent basis over time? And do the definition, of course, match with the concepts in the IRTS? And also, what is the purpose behind the data? Are data designed for one purpose but used for another one? Here, this typically relates to the administrative data and big data. They are not designed and it's not their primary purpose to be used for the production of tourism statistics. So to finish, here you can see the main steps identified for the implementation of a border survey, as it is the main survey on tourism flows. So these figures sets out a step-by-step process for implementing a border survey and highlight some relevant issues. This figure is available on the IRTS compilation guide that I showed at the beginning of the presentation. For the sake of time today, I'm not going to focus on all points. In fact, the implementation of a border survey is a subject that we deepen in our long capacity building programs of 2 years. So basically here we can expect, of course, a lot of steps. The first step is the setting up of an interinstitutional platform, as we have seen yesterday. Of course, all concepts, definition, and classification used have to be aligned with the international standards. And it is also essential to design well the questionnaire. In fact, you can find an example of a questionnaire in the IRTS compilation guide. An important thing also that we recommend at UNWTO is to do a piloting test of the survey before the real launch in order to check that all the points are well managed. So I stop here for the moment because my main message with this slide is to show you that if you need to implement or improve your survey, the IRTS compilation guide is a good guidance document to start with. So this was the background information. Thank you very much to everybody. And I look forward to receiving your questions and remarks.
Thank you very much, Leandri, for that really outstanding overview. Sometimes people might be tempted to think that, well, because we all engage in tourism, we all might know what it is. But when it comes down to measuring and to making things concrete, it really is a little more complex than might appear at first sight. So up next, we are also very fortunate in this workshop to count on, as my colleague Elsia Grandcourt was mentioning before, on two renowned UNWTO experts who have ample experience in providing technical assistance on statistics to countries. And one of them is Mr. Kevin Millington, who will be presenting next. He has over 30 years of experience in the tourism sector, having worked in over 60 countries and more than 160 projects. That's impressive. He has worked extensively with UNWTO on tourism statistics and TSA programs, and he specializes in developing systems of tourism statistics, designing and implementing surveys, and supporting the development of tourism satellite accounts. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Kevin, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Clara. Can everyone hear me okay? Wonderful, thank you. Oh, we're at the last slide, I beg your pardon. Let's go to the beginning. Right, I'm going to give you a quick overview on cruise tourism, which is a form of inbound tourism, as Leandri has just covered. Now, I do appreciate that some of our colleagues, this won't be of huge relevance, and I'm thinking of Lesotho, Zambia, and any other landlocked countries. But for everyone else who has a coastline, cruise tourism is extremely significant. It's a rapidly growing sector. I know it's been hit, as everyone has, by COVID, but it will bounce back. It is broadening. It's in different types of cruises, different sizes of vessels, different types of consumer, many destinations which haven't traditionally received cruise ships are starting to receive them, or will increasingly do so over the next few years, because quite simply, it's such a rapidly growing industry. Cruise operators are always looking for new destinations. Now, cruise passengers can be significant spenders and can make a big impact on the economy. So it is something that we need to measure and keep a track of. So I'm going to give you a very quick and practical guide to measuring the cruise sector. Now, there's really, as with most surveys, 3 ways of gathering data. We can interview them face-to-face, the cruise visitors. We can provide them with a self-completion questionnaire to complete and leave in a box, or we can gather their email address and email them so that they can fill in a questionnaire when they return home. The first one is by far the most preferred. It will give you the best results. Yes, it is more expensive, but it is without doubt the one that you should really focus on, and you will by far get the best findings from interviewing cruise visitors face to face. Now, when do we collect this data? Well, it's important that we collect it just before the visitor boards the vessel. So when they get back, the vessel arrives, cruise visitors come off the ship, they walk around, go on tours, whatever, and it's when they get back on the vessel, because then, only then can they report on their experiences, their expenditure, and so on. And it's normal to undertake surveys throughout the day because passengers spend different amounts of time on shore. Now, just look at this graph here. This is taken from a cruise vessel that we surveyed in Tonga. Now, you can see the time along the bottom. That's the time that the vessel was in the berth. And the graph shows the number of passengers which were ashore. Now you can see that the maximum number of people on shore was at 10 o'clock in the morning, just 2 hours after the first passenger stepped off the vessel. After that, it dropped off. Now, if we interviewed everyone right at the end of the day, we would have a skewed sample because the people who've spent the longest time on shore are likely to be most satisfied. They've spent the most. They would be very different to those here early who've just got off the vessel, had a quick walk around and come back on. So interviewing throughout the day is really important. Expenditure, as well, we covered it briefly, can involve purchase of virtually any product because these cruise passengers are tourists and that's they're day visitors, and that's how we measure it. Anything that they buy is something which we need to measure. But cruise visitors are very different to normal overnight tourists, overnight visitors, because their expenditure is quite narrow. They tend to spend only on food and drink, local transport, shopping, and shore excursions. Obviously, accommodation is normally out of the question, as is a lot of other types of expenditure which overnight visitors, which tourists purchase on. So it's quite limited, their expenditure. We don't need to worry about purpose of visit because they're virtually almost all, without exception, are traveling for holiday or leisure. So that's another simplicity compared to measuring overnight visitors. The other thing is that the type of vessel, and as a destination, you get to know this. You ask any destinations, such as the Seychelles, let's say, because I'm looking at Alan now. When a vessel comes in, everyone knows that broadly the country of residence of the nationalities of the people on board, because different nationalities favour different ships. So country of residence, you tend to get to know the type of visitors which are going to disembark from a ship. That doesn't, of course, mean you don't need to ask what their normal country of residence is, but the profile of visitors on a ship tends to be quite homogeneous, quite similar. So you don't need vast sample sizes. People on vessels tend to be very similar. So that's one good thing, because it reduces the cost of your survey. Typically, they travel with others, pretty much always in groups of 2 or more. And shopping is normally their main expenditure. Now, this shows duty-free. Not all destinations sell duty-free. Those that do tend to make a lot of money from it and do well out of it, but that's not important. Important is offering a nice range of local products, and it's great for obviously engaging local businesses. Cruise passengers, they really do like to spend. And excursions are very important. It varies from destination to destination, but typically around 50% of cruise passengers take some sort of shore excursion. The key thing when we're doing analysis is to remember that if the shore excursion was bought previous to arriving in the country, the expenditure on it must be halved, because half of that money remains with the cruise company, only half of it comes to the local economy. That's a bit of a rule of thumb that we use. For years, we've done lots of work and we've asked local cruise companies how much they receive out of the total amount that a cruise passenger pays, and it's always pretty much half. So when you're doing a cruise survey, if a cruise visitor says they spent $100 on a tour, you can broadly estimate $50 have entered the local economy, and the other $50 stays offshore and is not important to us. Quick thing to finish with. We've recently been lucky enough, well, relatively recently, it was 2019, to undertake a Seychelles cruise visitor survey. Just a few of the findings, just to give you a feel for what we can get out of these surveys. Probably not surprising, average number of passengers per cabin was 2. The next one is really interesting. Average time ashore, 5.8 hours. So that's a really good question to ask in your surveys. How long do you spend ashore? Obviously, we want to push that up. In 2 years' time in the Seychelles, we want to see that that's 6.5 hours or whatever. The longer people stay on shore, the more they're going to spend normally. This was the expenditure in the Seychelles. Now you can see that we've broken down the expenditure into more detail. We've broken car rental down from other land transport. We've broken shopping into crafts, clothing, and so on. This is, as a destination, you always need to decide what's important. What level of detail do you want to know? So you can ask more detailed expenditure questions. You can see that the tours right at the bottom there, the tours account for not quite, nearly half of all expenditure. So you can see what an important element they are. And in fact, there's a pie chart, so you can see easier. Tours made up 41% of all passenger expenditure in the Seychelles. Quite a bit on land transport, principally taxis, and you can see crafts and souvenirs. And we did ask actually what people would like to do more of, and they said they would like to shop more. So there was an opportunity in the Seychelles to increase the shopping offer. And this is probably something you've seen, and it's almost becoming very common now in surveys, Net Promoter Score, which is basically asking a very simple question. How likely are you on a scale of 1 to 10 to recommend the Seychelles or wherever to your friends and family? And they give you a score of 1 to 10, and you can work out the Net Promoter Score based on that. What you want to be doing is getting in the 60 and above area. That shows a very positive score. And really, the whole idea of this is if they enthuse about a place, they're more likely to put good things on social media, say good things to their friends. And we know how important that part of social media is, that reporting back, the posting on Instagram, the comments on TripAdvisor. And so this Net Promoter Score is really a very important thing as far as your marketing. And that is it. So I hope that's very useful. It's very quick, but it hopefully give you a little overview on how to measure cruise tourism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for sharing this very interesting work that you have been engaged in. And especially thank you for focusing on the very practical implications that you covered. So now we move on, in fact, to the Seychelles, where a very innovative new data source, in fact, fruit of the pandemic, is being considered for tourism statistics, We are very honored to have our following speaker, and we look forward to hearing about this innovative work from Mr. Alain Renaud, Principal Secretary of the Department of Civil Aviation, Ports and Marine of the Seychelles. In this position since 2018, Mr. Renaud has served as Project Director for Seychelles' new digital health travel authorization system, launched in September 2020, to assure the reopening of borders in the safest manner. He has also drafted coronavirus guidelines for super yachts, ushering a record number of super yachts calls, and he has presided over Seychelles' accession to 9 new air treaties and 5 new maritime treaties. Mr. Renaud, we are truly delighted that you could join us. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Kevin, earlier. That was fantastic. I really enjoyed your presentation, not just because you were talking about Seychelles, but cruise ships is actually one of our focuses this year, and we're hoping to see them come back in October. I'm so delighted to be here and to share with you. I will put my presentation on screen, and what I wanted to share with you is what we have done in the Seychelles to open up our economy since September 2015. Can everybody see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet? Oh, I forgot to share screen. Oh, sorry about that. That's an important point. I need to share the screen first before I do the slide. Okay. Now I think you'll be able to share my screen. Forgive me for that. How's it now?
It's perfect.
Okay, great. So when the pandemic hit us last year in February, obviously as a tourism destination, we were very concerned, obviously, about first we were closing our airport and how we would open up. And at that time it was a pandemic, so our doctors were in charge. And so what the doctors had did were they were basically defining under the Quarantine Act what the requirements were for a tourist to come in. And we were screening tourists for all their COVID-19 tests, their PCR tests, and where they were going to stay, all kinds of rules that were dictated by the doctors. Almost immediately, we knew there was going to be a problem because we were asking tourists to carry reefs and reefs of documents. They had to carry insurance papers, they had to carry their COVID certificates, they had to carry proof of accommodations, and then we had to make all the airlines check each of those documents at each of those destinations. So even on the very first aircraft, we were looking at departure times of 3 to 4 hours to disembark a single aircraft. And you would have a station where the documents, so imagine this, the passengers were sharing the same documents 4 times in their journey. First with the check-in agents when they embark on the first flight, and then if they have a connecting flight, they do it again. And then when they arrived in the Seychelles, we asked them to check again, and that was at the health station. And then when they went to immigration, they were checked again. We knew it was unsustainable. And so what we decided was we had to quickly move to a digital solution. And this is something that we did as part of a tourism task force. So we had all of the different agencies sitting together, meeting regularly to discuss how we're going to reopen our economy. So we had health, we had immigration, ourselves as transport, we had the police, we had tourism, everybody, and we were working out a system for that. And fortunately, because we were there and we were familiar with ICAO and we knew about certain companies that could do this, our Ministry of Transport took over, and we very quickly were able to, in about 3 months, to set up what I'm about to show you now, our visitor management platform. And what we did was we digitalized the entire process by how passengers requested travel authorization. And we already had existing immigration cards. There was a blue disembarkation card we made passengers fill, a health card we made them fill, yellow fever certificates. We put all of that in there. So what we've done is we are planning to, in August this year, retire every single one of our papers to have a completely paperless system, all the result of this pandemic. But what that did for us, and here's what I'm going to show you, is the information was now all electronic, giving us a superb, incredible amount of rich data. And that's what I would like to show.
Excuse me, Mr. Renaud, I'm sorry to interrupt, but perhaps we're not seeing you switching your slides?
I'm starting now. Okay, so we reopened in March, August 2020, and we went live with our system 4 weeks after go ahead. And then we had an online form, an online link where we asked passengers to go to this link. This is what it looks like on your screen. if you are now to apply for travel authorization to the Seychelles. When you go there and you click apply now, we ask a series of questions from all travelers for you to request a travel authorization. Behind the scenes, we have a bunch of staff who are sitting and reviewing each application, but the staff, the travelers have to enter this data or through agents and include things like their names, scan their passports, put up their hotel information, upload their PCRs, everything, and it's done in real time. And usually because of tourism, 72 hours for this PCR test, this is done about 72 hours, 48 hours before travel. And we collect a lot of information. We actually ask your immigration questions, everything. And when you have submitted your document, you get this blue QR code on the right to say you've been approved. Here is what our tourism arrival figures looked at this year. We actually opened in September 2015, but then we closed again because of an outbreak in December. So as you can see on the left is January the 1st. The blue line is 2021. The gray line is 2019. So we actually we embarked on a vaccination program for the first 3 months of the year. We wanted to vaccinate at least 60% of our population because we decided we were just going to open up the economy on March the 25th. And as you can see, on March the 25th, we saw an immediate surge in travel coming in. And as you can see, we were actually on track to hit our 2019 numbers by the middle of May. Unfortunately, in the Seychelles, the Delta variant entered our country, and we started to see an outbreak, and this put us on a red list and amber list with certain countries. And so our tourism has been a little bit flat, but we're now starting to see the surge go back up again. And we're very pleased with that, and thanks to our system. So what did we do? We implemented a new visitor management platform to minimize the risks. So what we ask passengers to do is to scan their passports, take a selfie, make a series of declarations, scan their documents, and pay. They receive an authorization, and all the airlines have to do is the passenger has to show that QR code. We give the airlines technology to scan it, so now the airlines do not have to actually check any documents at all, just see that you've received your authorization. So in the plane, there are no more forms to fill, no more landing card, no more customs card, no more health cards. From a UNWTO tourism perspective, I'm actually really delighted about this. Forget COVID-19. I'm just happy we've done this. If this is my only legacy, I'll be a very, very happy principal secretary. I'll tell you that right now. Now next on border entry. When we come into the country, the idea that we want to do, it's been a little bit difficult because, as you mentioned earlier, we have to work with different agencies, and all of those different agencies have their own sort of goals and objectives. And so it's a bit of persuasion, it's change management. So it's taken us a little while, but immigration has now agreed August 15th to retire all of their cards. So now you'll be able to enter the country with just your face or a barcode. And so we will have a green lane. About 80% of our passengers are approved with no questions. They should be able to just walk into the Seychelles, and we recognize them with their face, and our technology can actually recognize your face even with your mask on at 90% accuracy, which we've been very happy. We've been testing it for a few months. Now, during the trip in the Seychelles, that QR code is active for the entire length of your stay. So we know how long you're going to stay. If you're coming in as a tourist, you normally get 30-day visa. So your thing is good for 30 days. Whereas if you're on a business or professional traveler, it's how long you're staying. What we now use is that code can be read by other industries. And so one thing that we've done in the last 2 months or so is we know that travelers need to do PCR tests to go home. We are now integrated our system with all the labs in Seychelles. So now when a tourist wants to do a PCR test, they show that same code and all the data is included in there. And so when they get their PCR certificate, when they get their PCR test results, it's using data that the passenger already entered when they entered the country. And even better, we've offered the option for people to purchase their PCR tests in advance before they leave the country. And so we can actually go and do that all automated. It goes to the same email addresses and very nice. So all of it is about improving the passenger experience. And we have hotels that want to use it, SIM cards and car rentals. Now, what's fascinating for us is we're actually collecting so much data. In fact, when we first presented this, the National Bureau of Statistics, as well as the tourism department, as well as economic planning, were leaping on us to get access to the data, because for the first time we had real-time data, which was much richer than we had before. In our original immigration form, we would only ask you your first hotel that you were staying at. Most tourists will stay for 10 days, and on average, we now know statistically, they stay in 1.4 different establishments. There's some that stay in 3, some that stay in 1. And they wanted to know how many small hotels, how many big hotels, which islands are they staying at? It's all there. We just had to pull it out, and we didn't realize that. And it actually started consuming us, the statistics, because we didn't realize that the people who use it, they really wanted their hands on this. And I was very fascinated now about how we can fix this. We are soon going to also be implementing this system on departure, and we're going to have an outbound for outbound tourism. So this is actually legally required. We have a yellow card. We've done the inbound. We're now going to do outbound for our residents and our tour and our locals, where they also have to sort of fill in an online form and tell us details about how they're going to go out. And I thank very much Leandre's presentation earlier. I know now what kind of questions to put on there and how we'll structure that. And I will definitely be using the statistics recommendations for that. We also have the ability to do travel surveys, in the sense that we can send out surveys to the passengers because we have their email address, we contact them through WhatsApp, we have their mobile addresses, we have all their contact information. We haven't done it so far because we didn't want to be too intrusive, but as we move forward, we're going to start asking the tourists whether you wouldn't mind us doing surveys on them. We're also extending this technology in September this year to the cruise ships. So in this one single platform, we assess, vet, and monitor our travelers. So on the left is what we see in the system. So what you're seeing right now are 4 passengers who have applied to the Seychelles. If I'm to click on any one of those files, I will call up all that data and see all these things. And so we have the doctors, we have immigration, we have all the different agencies have been given access who need it. And each one of them does their own thing. So customs does its check, immigration does its check, and health does its check. And then we have our own staff. And on the right, you'll see the data that's being collected. All of this data moves into a warehouse in an Amazon Tier 4 server in Germany. It's collected in real time and updated in real time. We have created a platform where we can read the data. So through Kibana, you can access this data. One of the challenges we had was the EU GDPR rules. We had to be very careful about what data we can share. So all the data is protected. So when we are pulling data out, we wanted to first de-anonymize the data so that any staff who's using it for statistical purposes only sees the data that they need to see to do their analysis. So that took a bit of work for us, but we're proud to say that we're now doing that. On the far right of my screen, we also have passenger name record data. I noticed in Leandre's presentation, she mentioned ship manifest. We now submit that from the ships. We will do that for the cruise ships, and we also have that from the airlines. So in addition to what the travelers themselves submit to us, the airlines submit to us their check-in data and their booking data. And this is now ICAO Annex 9 international requirements. So we're very pleased that we've managed to implement this in the midst of a pandemic, and it's all interconnected. If I click on one, I can go to the other and go to the other, and all that data can be harvested. So here are some of the dashboards that we use that data for. And as I said, it's real-time data. So if you're sitting there, you'll see it update during the day. So on the left here, you'll see the submissions per day. We can see how the applications are submitted. This is a reflection of the actual flying times of the airlines. Emirates flies at this time of day, Turkish flies at this time of day. So you see the bulks of when they do it. On the bottom left here, you'll see the kinds of queries that we can pull from that data. Like, for example, how did they answer the question for how much money did they carry? We'll say, yes, approved, this customs question, this person carried more than $25,000, you know, so on and so forth. And you can customize that. Basically, any field that was collected, you can query. And on the right, if for those who are very good at Kibana, they are, so this screen looks different for economic planning, looks different for immigration, looks different for tourism, and looks different for National Bureau of Statistics. Every one of the departments pulls its own data and does its own thing. So as exactly what I said, we bespoke the dashboards to each ministry. So here is a snapshot of what we did early in the year. At that time, we had 9,839 applications, of which 873 were expedited foreigners, 38 were expedited locals, 100 were minors, 2 were minors Seychelles, 7,686 were foreigners, adults, 202 were adults, 913 foreigner minors, and passport holders. We have their, we don't only have their country, we have their city, we have their regions, district. Unbelievable. For the, it was a little bit, you know, weird that you had this much information about people. So I'll be honest with you. Luckily, the company working with Swiss, and they're very big into data privacy. So this was almost from the very beginning, we realized this is really sensitive data. And so we had to share what it was. But in the case of the tourism, They never knew, like from Germany, how many people are coming from Berlin, how many are coming from Düsseldorf, how many are coming from Bonn. We have that now. And same with Switzerland and other countries. Also, we gave people the option of donating to our environmental trust fund. So in this row here, in this purple circle here, this shows you how many people donated 10 euros to the environmental trust fund, how many donated 50, how many donated to 100. At this time, when we had 9,000 tourists that arrived, one-third of our tourists were actually freely donating to our environment. We actually introduced a $500 level, and I'm very delighted to tell you that at least once a month, somebody donates $500 to the Seychelles Environmental Trust Fund, which is a reflection of the tourists. We did not know that. And we have it broken down by country and flights and so forth. So we have complete oversight of in-country visitors. So because we have the information from the travelers, we were able to create a dashboard, or we have a screen inside. This is I could do this right now live, but this is what it looks like, where I want to know how many tourists are in my country right this very minute. And here they all are. On the left, I can also click on hotels. So I can go to see how many are at this hotel, how many are on this island, how many are on boats, and so forth. And we can search through that, which I find is very interesting. And you can sort it out by saying, where are all the British people? Where are all the German people? I'll be honest with you, we have more data than we know what to do with. Like, it's almost like it's too much, right? Because we never had this, so we don't even know what we're supposed to do with it. What are we gonna do? So they're figuring it out, right? But I'm very happy with the presentation earlier from Leandre, because now that's actually gonna help us focus. I'm definitely gonna take those recommendations, and we're gonna start putting these into the official buckets, like you guys said, so that we can at least do it in a way that you guys will be able to recognize, and maybe we could do something richer. So here's an example of what I mean by I know exactly where you are. So on the left, we clicked on the hotel, and on the right, you'll see a map, the Google map, which shows all the hotels. And if I click on one of these blue arrows, you'll see here that in the H Resort at this very moment, when this was done, there were 205 guests based on their declaration. Once we implement the departure system, we'll know exactly how many, because we take their word for it that they're there. And so if we double click on that, you'll then see exactly which one of those 205 guests are there at this very minute, and so forth. We can get weekly or monthly reports. We can sort them by purpose of visit. So Leandre asked earlier about your purpose of visit, whether leisure, excursionist. I'm going to introduce that excursionist category. That's something I didn't know before, but we're definitely going to throw that in there for the cruise ships. We've included questions like, are you on your honeymoon? Are you having a wedding? Are you on a pleasure trip? It was actually quite surprising how many people come just for weddings and honeymoons. We didn't know. Now that we asked, it seems people love to say, I'm coming to have my wedding. Okay, so travel authorizations, we can do it by any time period, how many per day, how many by hour, so we know how quickly that is. One thing that we found was fantastic was because we knew how many people were departing every day, it turned out that the labs really needed that information, because they needed to have enough people ready for people who were going to come and ask for PCR tests. So before we had integrated the systems, what was happening was you had lines and lines of tourists showing up at each of the labs. And we didn't know, are they showing up on Saturday? Are they showing up on Sunday? Are they showing up on Tuesday or Monday? Here, we're actually able to predict when the tourists are going to come and what kind of tests they have, antigen tests, COVID-19 PCR tests, and so forth. So that's also really, really good information for us, because we're able to mobilize our resources. On the left here, you'll see all the origins per day. So for all the applications we've received today, which countries, how many applied from Switzerland, how many applied from Russia, how many applied from, also by gender, by age and whatnot. We can do that by week, and per week, only the top 10. And this is normal because it's a Kibana thing. Here, let's do a case study of, let's say, Russian applications. I'll give you an example. We had Aeroflot come to Seychelles for the first time, I think in 10 or 15 years. Because it was such a big thing, the Minister for Tourism was literally just shaking us down every day. He wanted to know, where are these Russians staying? How many in small hotels? I want to know now. And we had to run these reports every single day, because he was under a lot of pressure that tourists were not all staying in the big hotels and so forth. So trust me when I tell you, we've been through this thing about when people really want the statistics. So in this case, here are all the applications from Russia. You can spot the moment that Aeroflot started flying to Seychelles. As you can see, they started flying towards the end of March, and then they started going to multiple flights per week. And here we are by week. So we're now at 4 flights per week with Aeroflot. And also, because we have the advanced passenger information and the passenger name record information that's supplied by the airlines, we're also able to do a map of all the different regions that are feeding into the Seychelles and by PAX. This data actually is the most useful for us personally as border security, because it's the actual people who boarded rather than who applied. So there's sometimes a gap between who applied and who actually traveled. Somebody might test positive, and so they may not come even though they had a booking, or last minute there's some failure or whatever. So the real data is what the airlines actually submit to us, and we cross-check them so we know who actually showed up. But it's also nice because we can see other things, and we've actually caught a lot of bad guys this way and done a lot of interesting information. And we're doing the same for the ships to see where passengers come. And Kevin is 100% correct about the nationalities on board of cruise ships. In 2019 and 2018, we saw German tourism arrival statistics go up to 60, 70,000 a year. And of course, it's driven because we had a lot of German cruise ship companies coming into Seychelles, and it's literally, that's what it was. We have the demographic breakdown by aircraft, by flight. So from that data from the airlines, we know which airlines are bringing which passengers, what kind of groups. One of the things we observed is there was a huge demand for yachts, and families were traveling more than before. So we have a bigger sort of percentage of families and groups. And we thought that that was because of COVID. People were separated and they like to stay together, and yachts are particularly nice because they're all in a controlled environment and they can relax as opposed to having to constantly interact with other people. So that was some fascinating stuff here. So these are different airlines that come. And all of this can be generated from the rich data collected. As we said, we can create any report, and we don't even know what we have it yet. And I'm very delighted by today's presentations, because that's the kind of feeding information that we really wanted, because we have it. What do we do with it? And already I can see some multiple opportunities for us to sort of harmonize with the UN-WTO goals in a major way. And what we've been getting is feedback from the other stakeholders, and sometimes they don't know what they want because they never had it before. And that's our presentation, and very happy with this. It's sort of a subset. The real purpose of that system was border security and screening for health. But as it happened, it turns out we had the gift that kept on giving in terms of statistics. And so we'll be delighted to work together with the UN-WTO and others to see what we can do to make that data set actionable and of use to our friends and colleagues overseas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Renaud, for sharing this truly fascinating experience in the Seychelles. And I believe I speak for everyone with us that you literally had us glued to the screen with the content, but also with your enthusiasm about it. So thank you so much. And indeed, as the saying goes, never let a good crisis go to waste. Definitely a best practice in the region, if not also globally. It's very impressive how you managed to rally the various stakeholders and also integrate the different data sources towards, as you were saying, a digital solution for your motto of providing real-time business intelligence and supporting tourism. A fantastic tool to support policy, private sector, and as you say so yourself, improving the visitor experience, which is more important than ever in these times. So thank you very much again. We now move
Clara, I raised my hand. Can I say something?
Oh, of course, Elsia, please go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say thank you to Alan for this brilliant presentation, not just because I'm from Seychelles, but now I wear my hat as the Director of Africa, because I know that with this company that you launched this with, they are in discussions, and we gave them a platform when we were in Namibia 2 weeks ago. I know we have the Namibian colleagues that are connected here. Probably they are still in the process of making a decision whether they move with this. I think you expanded this very clearly, and I hope that the other member states that are listening in also see the value of it, because we do have a big issue on data management, data collection. And if this is a window, and if this is an avenue for countries to be able to maximize these opportunities, we highly encourage them. We are in touch with this company, Travisry. Of course, there are so many other solutions out there, but once we have one that really works, and you see that you got even added value to it, we strongly recommend. And if you need us to facilitate this with this company, we'd be happy to do so. But of course, as I said, there are so many other solutions out there. These are one of them. And at the end of the day, it's the country's decision to take it. I felt it was important to mention because I know Travisri was with us in Namibia. They already met with some ministers of different countries, countries similar to you, Seychelles, Cabo Verde, for example. They had long discussions with the minister there and all the other ministers that was there with us. So again, thank you. And that's really, for me, on a personal level, I've had some insights of how to prepare my trip coming home soon. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elsia, for those very valid points. We have, I believe, a short poll at the moment. So Diana, if you would be so kind as to pull that up, please. So this is a question to see whether you have been paying attention during the presentations. Tourism refers exclusively to arrivals by air and by cruise ships. Is that true or false? We will keep it up for a few more seconds, Diana, before we close it. And I will already start heading into item 3 of the agenda, measuring domestic tourism. So yesterday we learned about the very interesting focus in Lesotho on measuring domestic tourism to drive recovery. What we will do now is dig a little deeper into the conceptual issues, the main data sources, and the key variables with my dear colleague Leandri again. Leandri, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Clara. Here we go. So as we have seen, domestic tourism is a very important form of tourism. Worldwide, we have seen at UNWTO that domestic tourism was 6 times larger than international tourism in the pre-pandemic period. Countries with higher shares of domestic tourism are likely to recover earlier and faster, because travelers are considering destinations closer to home due to the travel restrictions still in place in international travel. So although international tourism often receives more attention, as you mentioned this morning, Clara, due to its capacity to generate variable export revenues, domestic tourism represents a much larger share of travelers and spending in many countries. So here, the importance to measure it well. In this session or module, the main objectives are to understand that domestic tourism refers to trips made by resident visitors, both nationals and foreigners, to delineate the usual environments, to recognize the main variables, and to identify the available data sources for domestic tourism. Here, a quick recap on the definition of tourism. For domestic tourism in particular, the criteria of usual environment is key. We are going to see a bit more in my next slide. So domestic tourism refers to the activities of a resident, visitor within the country of reference, independently of his or her nationality. So they can be nationals, I mean with the nationality of the country of reference, or foreigners with another nationality. A domestic trip refers to the travel of a visitor from the time of leaving his/her usual residence until he or she returns, and it refers to a round trip. Let's take an example to clarify it. I live in Spain, but I'm French. If I go outside my usual environment, let's say I live in Madrid and I go out in the mountain for a weekend, for example, or less than a year, and for the purpose of leisure or any other purpose that we have seen this morning that qualifies as tourism, I will be considered in Spain as a domestic visitor if I spend the night a domestic tourist. So the usual environment is very specific to tourism statistics, where it is used as a defining condition, in fact. This means that to be considered a tourism trip, traveler must take the traveler outside his or her usual environment. So what is the usual environment of an individual? Here we have the definition. It's the geographical area, not necessarily a contiguous one, within which an individual conducts his or her regular life routines, place of work, of study, any place visited regularly, even if it's located far away, such as shopping centers or home of family and friends or healthcare facilities. However, it has not been possible to really develop a unique and operational definition for statistical purposes of an individual usual environment. This is due to differences between and within countries in population density, in transport accessibility, in cultural behavior, and proximity to national or administrative borders. So the definition, in fact, is quite flexible. The implementation of the definition is quite flexible. We recommend at UNWTO the use of 4 possible criteria. It's up to each country to select the criteria they prefer. At least it's important to use the frequency and duration. So here we have frequency of the trip, duration of the trip, the crossing of administrative borders, and distance from the place of usual residence. Here we see an examples from the IATS compilation guide of selected countries with their selected criteria. So for example, let's say that in my country, France, you are outside your usual environment if your trip is more than 100 kilometers. And it's the respondent who evaluate this. For example, another example, for Saudi Arabia, the distance is shorter, 80 kilometers, but the frequency of visit is at least once a month. So you can see a lot of country examples in the IATS compilation guide. I invite you to look at it. In terms of domestic tourism, what do we have to measure? I'm going to show you briefly the data and indicators that UNWTO compiles annually to ease the international comparability. On domestic tourism, the main data and indicators relate to the trips of resident tourists and excursionists, broken down by main purpose, by mode of transport, by form of organization of the trip, in accommodation in commercial establishments. We have also some indicator on the average size of the travel party and the length of stay, broken down by all accommodation services or hotel and similar establishments, and also the average expenditure per day. So we are going to see here the example from Mozambique. In fact, I have to say that there is very little data available in Africa on domestic tourism, and few exceptions in this particular group, such as Mozambique. And so I have also taken the example of South Africa to illustrate a bit more the kind of data that we can get. So in Mozambique, we have the number of guests and overnights in hotels and similar establishments, made, of course, by domestic visitors, and the length of stay in these accommodation services. And South Africa, we have the number of domestic trips. Of course, you can access these graphics and tables in the UNWTO webpage. So because there are no international borders to cross, the observation of domestic tourism requires the use of different statistical procedures. We can use sources such as surveys, household survey, by, for example, interviewing people about trips undertaken in a specific period. They can provide comprehensive information on both same-day and overnight visitors, these household survey. And here, the core variable is the trip. Surveys at accommodation establishments. So here we can get the number of nights spent. And it's a good indicator of the magnitude of travel within the countries, as it not only reflects the visit itself, but also the length of stay. Of course, it won't provide a complete picture of domestic tourism, as in many countries, domestic flows are mainly of same-day visitors, and most domestic tourists do not use commercial accommodation. We can also use surveys at attraction places, and here the challenge will be also to separate well between inbound visitors and domestic visitors. For big data sources, I think we have talked a lot yesterday about them, but we can use for domestic tourism, of course, data from mobile network operators and booking platforms. Of course, it's not the main sources are not only those one, but they are the main one. It will depend on the availability of each country. So I think I'm finishing here for the sake of time. Yeah, this was the background information on measuring domestic tourism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leandri, for this very nice summary of the main elements in measuring domestic tourism. I have a small incision to make at this point. As we are a bit mindful of the time, we will be keeping, or we have decided to keep the questions on the previous item and perhaps also of the items that follow for the final item labeled questions and answers on your agenda. However, you are more than welcome to already jot down your comments and questions in the Q&A function or in the chat, so that we can already start processing them and organizing our time wisely. So without further ado, I turn again to Mr. Kevin Millington to complement Leandri's presentation with some tips drawing from his ample practical experience in supporting countries. Kevin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Clara. And you can all see my screen, I hope.
Yes, we can.
Excellent, thank you. Before I talk about domestic, I'm just very quickly want to jump back to Alan's presentation because like Clara and Elsia said, I think that the travel advisory system is for me a game changer. I've been working in collecting tourism statistics for 25 years, and this is the most exciting thing I've seen. I think a bit like Elsia said, I was more excited in that presentation than I will be watching England tonight play Denmark. So, you know, it was that good. So, you know, it really, fortunately, Kepa and I are working in the Seychelles at the moment. We've seen this system develop a little bit, and it is as good as Alan has presented it. And I know some of our delegates here, but Takello, I think, is linking in from Lesotho. There in Lesotho, like many other countries, one of the first things we did was talk to immigration, tried to find how we could link into their database of arrivals. It's never easy, it's always difficult. If one good thing comes out of COVID, it might be something like this, you know, the emergence of systems like this, which hopefully will stay in place and really benefit us as far as measuring tourism. Anyway, that's now back to domestic. I always think of measuring inbound and domestic as inbound is very exciting and domestic is a little bit boring. But what's happened in the last year and a half is domestic tourism has really come of age, and you know, it's been a real focus for many destinations, and suddenly it's become very important measuring it. So more than ever before, we really need to stand up and think about measuring domestic tourism. very quickly, as Leandri has beautifully covered, 3 types of tourism. We're going to be focusing on domestic, but an interesting thing here is, I know we're not talking about measuring outbound tourism today, but you can measure outbound tourism at the same time as you measure domestic if you're doing a household survey. So you can get sort of 2 for the price of 1, if you like. Again, as Leandri has said, you've got this usual environment issue, which varies from country to country for the reasons she said. That needs to be defined clearly before you do any survey. This was from when we set one up in South Africa, which was 40 kilometers and once a week travel. I think Leandri presented it as 50, they've now changed it to 50 kilometers. But the usual environment is such a key part of doing a survey. It does need to be defined at the outset. Now, of course, like any other form of tourism, inbound or outbound as well, we've got to decide, are we measuring same-day visitors and overnight visitors, same-day trips and overnight trips, or just one or the other? That's, again, a big decision, in particular because it's difficult for people sometimes to recall day trips. We all remember overnight trips. We can remember where we stayed, what hotel we stayed in, what friends we stayed with, but day trips are often harder to recall. So some common problems, a lot of countries, as Leandri showed, don't measure it, and some use accommodation data, which is, can help. It can give an idea of domestic travel, but of course it doesn't include day visits. It doesn't include trips to people staying with friends and relatives. So it doesn't give us a complete solution. It is best done as a household survey. So it is a little bit expensive. Household survey, as I said, is the best way. I've been involved in implementing them in South Africa, Lesotho, Namibia, and Botswana. And only South Africa survey has been continuous. That was, once we set that up, it is ongoing as a quarterly survey. And it needs to be year round to capture seasonality, like any survey, really. If you just do it at certain points, you're not necessarily going to get a balanced view of domestic travel. Very quickly, some of the big hitters, like Canada, who are doing a sample size of 54,000 households a year, every month. They're asking people to recall trips in their previous month, so not a long recall. They're publishing it quarterly and annually. They're doing it face-to-face in households and on the telephone. And 87 million trips a year, which is about 2.5 trips per annum. Similar thing in the UK, it's even bigger. There's 103,000 households. It's being done weekly, but recall period is 4 weeks. So people are being asked to remember what they did in the last 4 weeks. And again, it's face-to-face. And in Australia, it's done by telephone, but again, a big sample. And this is all very well for these countries who've got big budgets to measure these trips, but not always so good for the rest of us. But let's just quickly look at how we would structure a domestic tourism. Let's just look at survey. Just look at the first column here. Because when we do a household survey, we've got to remember that we're interviewing one person, but we're interested in the whole household. So the way the survey would typically be structured is we'd be saying to the respondent, how many day trips did you take? How many overnight trips did you take in your country? And if we're also asking about outbound, we need to ask that again. We need to say, how many day trips did you take to a foreign country? How many overnight trips did you take to a foreign country? But then we need to say, what about other household members, which didn't travel with you? How many day trips did they take in your country? How many overnight trips did they take in your country? How many day trips did they take in a foreign country? And so you can see this, this really swells up. And when we did this in South Africa, the questionnaire was a big chunky thing, and you can see it had 8 sections to it. But when we actually trialed it, we found we had a real problem area with day trips. Because people just couldn't remember them. So ultimately I'm not sure if it's still the case, but we took that section out and we just didn't measure day trips in the domestic tourism survey. So you can see these surveys can get quite big. If you don't measure outbound travel in the same questionnaire, obviously it reduces it further. But these questionnaires take time, and I've sat in on a lot of interviewing that was done, I think, in Namibia. And typically, a questionnaire would take in someone's living room, so it's comfortable, but it would take anything up to 30, 45 minutes. That's the sort of data we'd be collecting. How many trips have you taken in each of these groups? Now, of course, understanding the number of trips is only the beginning. We then got to understand things like expenditure and where they went and what they did and so on. So for that, we can't ask them about every trip. You'd be there for days. So the usual way of dealing with this is to ask about the most recent trip in each of those boxes. So the most recent day trip, the most recent overnight trip. And then that becomes a proxy for all the other trips. Seems odd, but in sample surveys, these sort of things work. So these are the typical questions we would ask. What was your destination? And if it was multiple destinations, how many hours or nights in each one? What date did you travel? What date did you leave and depart, so we can get the length of stay? How many people were on the trip? How many people from the household? Because there might be people from other households on the trip, and we need to take that into consideration at analysis stage. Purpose of visit, main type of transport used, and if we just have one type of transport, the one which did the greatest distance, because obviously people sometimes might walk, they might get on a train, they then may take a taxi. So there's often several types of transport used and a type of accommodation used. And also, again, it can get complicated. So sometimes we just say the type of accommodation that you spent the most nights in and activities that people participated in. And expenditure, again, was a package purchased. So it's a bit like inbound. Sometimes people go on package travels in domestic, not very often, but it can happen. And then we've got our usual expenditure groupings, not too dissimilar to what you would measure on inbound, but maybe you have things like parking, which wouldn't, parking fees, which you wouldn't have on an inbound survey. But again, you've got to think about, if you're going on to develop a tourism satellite account, you've got to think about your categories there and being able to develop them in a way that will be compatible with your TSA development. Improvement techniques. Some countries use a diary. So when they go to a household, they'll say, well, we're doing this survey. We want you to track all your trips in the next month. Here's a diary, write them down. And it might seem a burden, but it does tend to work quite well. So that can improve the accuracy. And this is just one example that's popped out of my desk in the last week. Domestic tourism marketing strategy for Vanuatu. I'm convinced this would not have happened if it wasn't for COVID. I've seen it in lots of other small island destinations, been big focus, for example, in the Falkland Islands where I do a lot of work. So it's become a big thing, domestic tourism strategies. And if you've got a strategy, you've got to measure it. There's no point having a strategy and not measuring, see whether it's working or not. So you've got to measure it, see whether it's working, see if your advertising is working, your marketing, all the rest of it. So you need a survey. Final slide, because I know we're really pushed for time. Table 2 of the TSA. I've mentioned the TSA already, domestic tourism. Many countries we say, oh, just don't worry about that. It's small, it's negligible. Small islands, it's very difficult to measure domestic tourism because it barely exists because they're so small. But I think in the Seychelles, we sort of said, right, domestic tourism is traveling from one island to another rather than making it any more complex than that. So, it is an important part of the TSA. In some countries, it's significant as far as expenditure goes. So another reason to be measuring it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Clara.
Thank you very much to you, Kevin, for highlighting these important considerations. You're right, it can often be challenging to measure domestic tourism, but you provided some very helpful advice. As we are mindful of the time, I will head directly into the poll. Diana, if you could please pull that one up, please. Thank you very much. So domestic tourism comprises the activities of a resident visitor within the country of residence. Is this true or false? Now, the results of the poll will be provided to you at the end during the Q&A item, which I believe is item 6. and we will be discussing and going over them there. So time has come for a short break. Diana, you can pull off the poll in a few seconds or so, and we will be heading into a short break. Let's get back. I am looking to the rest of the panelists because we are running slightly behind time. What would you say that we come back? Well, it's 12:30 on the dot now. Let's try and give everyone still 10 minutes for stretching their legs and grabbing some coffee and coming back. Yes, I do kindly request everyone to please be on time. Thank you very much and see you in 10 minutes. Okay, I believe it's 12:40 now. Welcome back, everybody, and thank you for being on time. We will head straight into item 4 on estimating tourism expenditure. You will recall that earlier we mentioned that we had two renowned UNWTO experts with us, and you already met Kevin. The second one is Mr. Kepa Aramburu, who will provide an overview of this important area of statistics. Mr. Kepa Aramburu has over 25 years of experience and has worked with us at UNWTO on various tourism statistics and TSA projects. His main activities relate to the assessment of systems of tourism statistics, capacity training, and the development of several tourism satellite accounts at national and also subnational level. Thank you for being with us, Kepa. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Clara. Thank you also to the previous speakers. They have been a very great, inspiring presentation. I hope I will maintain the same level. Good day to all of you. It's nice to see some familiar faces here. I am in the south side of Spain. I don't live here, so I am on vacations with my family. 1,000 kilometers far from my house, from my place of residence. So I guess that I am a domestic overnight visitor, doing some kind of tourism activity here. So I will take advantage of my situation to do some kind of examples during my presentation. I'm going to share slides. Okay. Before starting, tourism expenditure. So we have talked a little bit, or previous speakers have mentioned some ideas about expenditure also during their presentations, but we are going to add the tourism expenditure here. Leandri has said in the first presentation that tourism is a demand side phenomenon. So it's created by people who travel outside their place of residence to other places. And during their trips, they develop a consumption activity. They consume services and goods, and these services and goods are offered by the economies that they are visiting. So the measurement of this expenditure from the demand, so asking directly to visitors, becomes the most suitable method to determine the economic impact of tourism activity of visitors in a country. The learning objectives of this session will be, okay, we'll focus on the definition, what is included in tourism expenditure, the appropriate time of recording of the expenditure, the main data sources, which are the categories, some of them we have seen before some of the presentation, which are the categories of concepts of tourism expenditure. And finally, we are going to add two points related to the uses of this tourism expenditure. And the relation of tourism expenditure with both balance of payment data and with national accounts and tourism satellite account requirements. So let's start with the definition. Tourism expenditure is the amount paid for the acquisition of consumption goods and services, as well as valuables, for own use or to give away for and during tourism trips. This includes expenditures by visitors themselves, so expenditures paid by visitors themselves, as well as expenses that are paid for or reimbursed by others. This is an important remark here. So What really matters here for tourism expenditure to be included or not is who is consuming the service and not who pays for it. Even though in majority of cases it will be the same person, okay? But there are some examples. For instance, some visitors visiting other places for business purposes. Some of the services are paid by their companies directly. The visitor himself is not paying for the service, but their company is paying for it. And these services, this expenditure is included in tourism expenditure. So it's regardless who is paying for it, is consumed by the visitor. We have, Leandri has presented us different forms of tourism. And the key factors of these forms of tourism before, there were two key variables that were determining which form of tourism was. So first, it is the residence of the visitor, and then is the destination visited, and the relation between these two variables. And when we are adding expenditure to the form, so form of tourism expenditure, we have to add also the knowledge of the residents of the provider of the service, because the classification of tourism expenditure by form of tourism is not totally the same than in the measurement of flows of visitors. This is quite relevant for in the case of the further relation or the further presentation of the relation of tourism expenditure with balance of payment, for instance. So, for instance, not all expenditures done during outbound trip must be considered outbound tourism expenditure, because some of these expenditures are related to services that are provided in the economy of reference, okay? All reservations of travels, all the travel agents, all the services that are paid before the trip and are provided by resident entities, they must be considered domestic tourism expenditure, even though they are included in an outbound trip. With regard to the time of recording, what is the most suitable moment to record the expenditure? The moment of the recording must be the moment of the transfer of the ownership of goods, and not the time of the payment. So the service, the expenditure on a service occurs when the service is consumed, really. So expenditure on transport services occurs when we are being transported, or the expenditure on accommodation services, they occur when we are staying in the place of accommodation. This is important because some services that are paid in advance, afterwards they are canceled or postponed. And even though these services paid in advance, they are not reimbursed, these services are not included in the tourism expenditure, because these are services that are not really actually consumed in the economy. So when shall we measure? We shall measure once the trip is complete. This is the best moment the most suitable moment to ask visitors for all the expenditure done during related to their trips. So in the case of inbound tourism and outbound tourism, the most suitable moment to undertake the survey or the recording is at the point of departure or arrival. And in the case of domestic tourism, of course, it will be preferable always to do it after completion of the trip, once the trip is complete. The real reason for this is that visitors are always best able to answer questions about all their expenditures at the moment of conclusion of the trip, and not at the onset when a large portion of the expenditure is still to be made. So I came here to the south side, to the sunny south side of Spain. I came here on last Saturday. Today is Wednesday, and I'm coming back home next Saturday. So I just in the middle of my vacation, of my trip, of a domestic trip. If someone asks me now for my expenditure, I will be able to give them some of my services, so some of my expenditures, some the cost of my rental car or the cost of my apartment here in the coast. But I won't be able to give a correct answer or to correct expenditure of the services that I'm going to buy or consume in next days until Saturday. I think it's clear. Which are the main data sources? That this is very related with the time of recording, with the time of requesting information. So the most suitable ones. So tourism expenditure can be, of course, can come from different sources. We must not be focused on just one only data source, but several data sources can complement themselves and create a good data to achieve a correct or a quality tourism expenditure. So the most usual ones, we have talked about them in previous presentations, are surveys at borders for international tourism, so inbound tourism, and household surveys for domestic tourism, as Kevin has said. Also, outbound tourism can be included in household surveys. So outbound tourism can be tourism expenditure of outbound tourism can come from border service or household service. Some other service can complement this main data source, this main service, this most usual service, and these are the guest service in accommodation establishments. And in that case, these other data sources, we have to be very careful with their limitations in the coverage of the population. In the case of the accommodation establishments, next presentation we will see that weakness. And on the other side, other service like the supply service can provide some information that is not provided by the own visitor. Not only for package tours, for instance, the visitors themselves, they don't know what is the distribution of prices within their package tours, and this distribution of prices of package tour can be requested to the own supply of the package tour. Okay, other sources you have the chance to see some of the presentation yesterday about the big data. In that case, tourism expenditure can be included or can come from the payment card data. So this is a data that is owned by bank companies, and some countries, they are using this data to complement the information that they receive or that they produce in the service, okay, to have a larger sample of records of visitors, to know the structure, the distribution of the different services within the total expenditure of the visitors. In this case, the recommendation will be the same. So we must be very careful and analyze currently what is the coverage of this data, who is covering, because not all the expenditures of a visitor in a destination, not all expenditures are done with card data. They can use other sources, other payment methods for their expenditure, and not all visitors are using these cards. So this is always being very careful. The main advantage of the first two data sources, so this service at borders and this survey at household survey, is that we are doing surveys, we are designing surveys that have a total coverage of the population that we are going to investigate. So we are going to investigate inbound tourism expenditure, and for that we have all the information of the inbound population provided by the border control data, as we have seen in Seychelles with this rich, amazing database. And in the case of the household surveys, it's the same. So we have access to all the population that is the subject of any trip done within the country. So we have the census of population, and we design a sample. We design a sample to investigate all trips done by this population. In the other cases, the other data will have always some lack of coverage. With regard to what are the categories of expenditure that we are going to request to visitors, of course they are related, they are totally related with the services and goods that are consumed during the trip or before the trip, but related to the trip. So what we must be what we must take into account that we are requesting to visitors this expenditure, so we must ask them in a way they understand what we are asking, and the visitor itself, they know what is the expenditure according to the purpose of the expenditure. So they means that they know what is the company, or what is the type of service they have paid, what is the company that has received the money they have paid for the service, and this is a classification according to its purpose. So it's aligned with the international classification of individual consumption by purpose. It's an international classification, and the recommendations are at least these 8 categories. That is the package travel, package holidays and package tour, accommodation, food and drink, local transport, international transport, recreation, cultural sporting, shopping, and other. There we can see that some of them, they are not really one single product of the economy. So for instance, within the package travel, within the package tour, there are different products of the economy, okay? Within the shopping, there are different products of the economy. So we will see that in a further slide when seeing the relation with national accounts. So with regard to what is the information that is asked by UNWTO to countries regarding the expenditure, we see here that there is a simple total information aggregate, total aggregate of information, and is related to balance of payment item. What is the reason for that? But balance of payment data is available for the vast majority of countries in the world, and some countries, they don't have the tourism expenditure so many cases produced. Okay, so this is the reason, because the UNWTO asks for or collects data from BOP. But there are some conceptual differences. So tourism expenditure, in that case, balance of payment will be related, as we can see, only with international tourism expenditure. But there are other conceptual differences. We are going to get a look to that. So we have the categories of tourism expenditure, and in the case of the balance of payment, we have other two, a simple classification of travel and passenger transport account. And tourism expenditure is formed by the different forms of tourism. So it's domestic tourism expenditure, inbound tourism expenditure, outbound tourism expenditure. So balance of payments is not including domestic tourism expenditure, because balance of payments is related with a non-resident to resident transaction. Okay, so this is only concerning international transactions. In the travel account, all categories of tourism expenditure will be included, except of international transport, that is will be in passenger transport. So until here, it seems that tourism expenditure and balance of payment had a clear correspondence, but we must be careful in thinking that all the tourism, inbound tourism expenditure can be applied to travel credits, or all tourism outbound tourism expenditure can be applied to debits, to balance of payments debits, because there are some differences in the scope of the expenditures covered in travel item and in tourism expenditure. Well, these are here in they are quite tricky. We are not going to focus on them, but of course there are differences in the expenditures that are covered, but also there are differences in the cases that are covered. So not all population that is included in balance of payments are included in tourism statistics. So for instance, crew members of the cruise ships, they are of course non-residents that they are visiting. Some of them, they are visiting the country, but they are not considered visitors. But so they are included in the travel item of balance of payment, but they are not included in the tourism statistics. Of course, this is generating such a problem in those countries like the next presentation one, where tourism statistics are used to compile the balance of payments. Okay, because if this is the case, when when producing data for tourism expenditure, for inbound tourism expenditure, the condition of visitor against traveler must be a little bit adapted to incorporate some of these travelers that otherwise they will be excluded from tourism statistics. The final slide is more the adjustment or the relation of tourism expenditure with the national accounts and tourism satellite account. This is a final step that must be taken into account. And
Dear Kepa, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I do need to ask you to please be mindful of the time.
Okay, so this is just to it's in order to see that there are different classification of categories are based on purpose, and the classification of national accounts are based on economic approach. So the categories of tourism expenditure, they go to different products of the economy. Okay, so this is just to see that finally, for instance, we put the sample that in the accommodation service there is a reservation. There's a reservation service. There's a travel agent. This is accommodation service, and it may be in the accommodation category of the visitor some consumption of food and drink at the hotel. So this is quite important to be identified, because it serves to give a proper distribution afterwards of service exports and resident purchases in foreign economy in national accounts. And this is all for my side. Sorry for time.
No worries. It was very important information. So and it is a very challenging area of work. So I do appreciate that you wanted to touch upon all these important elements. Indeed, measuring tourism expenditure is absolutely critical and can be challenging. Still, it's a necessary step to understanding the economic dimension of tourism and advance towards a tourism satellite account to derive things like tourism direct GDP. So thank you very much. There is also a very close relationship, as you were mentioning, Kepa, between tourism expenditure and international trade. And in our next presentation, we will learn about the experiences in this sense in Zambia, presented by Mr. Kafula William Longa. Mr. Longa is a senior economist at the Bank of Zambia, where he is responsible for the analysis of external sector developments. He is a leading member of the team that produces the Private Capital Flows and Investment Perceptions Report, a survey that measures foreign direct investment in Zambia. Mr. Longa, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to make this presentation. So I've learned quite a lot today, and I'm excited to be part of this virtual meeting. So we were requested just to sort of speak to how Zambia measures tourism expenditure. So that's basically will be my presentation this morning or afternoon, as it were. So briefly, my outline is the first item we'll look at will be collection of tourism statistics in Zambia. Then we'll look at the institutional arrangements, the estimation of tourism expenditures. Then we'll go through a few challenges and then plans for improvements. So the collection of tourism statistics or travel, according to the balance of payments, is essentially done by three agencies: the Bank of Zambia, the Ministry of Arts, of Tourism and Arts, and the Department of Immigration. So the Bank of Zambia is mandated to compile and publish the balance of payments statistics for Zambia. And in line with that mandate, we compile travel statistics according to the balance of payments manual 6 of the IMF. So basically, as it has been well said in this meeting, in the BOP, when you're looking at inbound tourism, we're essentially looking at travel credits. Then outbound, we're looking at travel debits. So the bank computes the travel debits and credits using information that it obtains from the Department of Immigration on entry and exit statistics, as well as the surveys that the bank implements. So I'll get to that a bit later. But looking at the ecosystem of tourism statistics, like I earlier mentioned, the Ministry of Tourism and Arts also compiles and publishes tourism statistics. And essentially, they look at domestic tourism to complement the work that the bank does on the international side. Looking at institutional arrangements, like I've earlier on mentioned, the Bank of Zambia compiles the travel debits and credits by conducting a quarterly survey of hotels and lodges. So essentially, we're looking at credits here. So we want to find out from these establishments how much the visitors to Zambia spend when they are at those lodges. And we ask other questions in addition to expenditure on accommodation, like the standard questions which were shown in the earlier presentation. So we cover most of those in our questionnaire. So for us particularly, we ask about the cost of game viewing, boat cruises, and other services, as well as visa fees that are paid by these visitors, as it were. Secondly, the Ministry of Tourism collects various information. They also use a survey instrument, and they visit establishment to get information from heritage sites, national parks, and museums. And most importantly, for both BOS and the Ministry of Tourism and Arts, we get information on entry and exit from the Department of Immigration, just for the purpose of computing international tourism or travel debits and credits, as it were. Let me also ask them to mention here that we've got a committee that we call the Balance of Payments and Statistical Committee, which comprises the government institutions and agencies that compile and publish external sector statistics. So this committee meets on a quarterly basis to share information, as well as to validate information before the balance of payments table is published. Now going to the nitty-gritties on the actual estimation. So for travel, both on the credit and the debit side, what we essentially look at are these pieces of information that we have here. The first one is average length of stay. So we established this metric using the survey of the tourists, of the visitors at the hotels and lodges. Although going forward, we've been in touch with our Department of Immigration, and we've had a discussion to try and see if from their system, they can sort of give us some indicative length of stay of the people who come into Zambia, because we're sure they are able to do that. But at the moment, we are just using our survey to try and get an estimate of how much time people spend here. Then from the same survey, we do obtain data on average expenditure per person. And the expenditure data is on the following item: purchases of goods, local transport services, accommodation, food service, as well as other services that they may consume whilst they are here. So again, as I've mentioned, for the number of travelers inbound and outbound, this data is administratively sourced from the Department of Immigration. Essentially, using these pieces of information, we are able to get the travel credits as well as debits. So now moving to the last one, the challenges that we faced in our compilation. So the first one is that the survey is a bit limited in scope because we visit a few establishments, we don't cover so many hotels and lodges, and it's essentially just concentrated in one region, the southern part of the country. So what we've thought about and the technical assistance we've received suggested that we discontinue focusing on surveying people at hotels and lodges and instead move to an exit and entry survey. So we do this at the major points of entry. So that's actually the direction that we are going in, to try and get this information at the points of entry. And in this vein, if I go to improvements, what we've done as a bank, we've looked at a way of being much more efficient, because in the past we've sort of used paper. We've gone out there with questionnaires, we've administered interviews and ticked, and we think that's not efficient. So to improve on our efficiency, we've decided to automate some of our processes. So when we roll out the border entry and exit survey, that will be done on tablets, and it will be connected like to a central server where that information will be received and analyzed. Then other plans for improvement that are being taken at the country level is the development of the TSA. This work is now quite advanced, and we are sure it will be completed soon. Then, of course, to improve the quality of our statistics, we are always working to refine the instruments, and I've seen very good information today, so that's some of the information that we also take into account. Then what we also intend to do is just to improve the validation of tourism data. I think most times when we validate the balance of payments data, we concentrate on what one would consider the big ticket items, like government debt and trade in goods and services, but not so much tourism data. So I think our focus will also now shift into this particular area, just to ensure that our data is up to a good standard. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Longa, for this very thorough presentation. And it really is wonderful to have a representative from the central banks at this workshop, because we cannot emphasize enough how important this relationship is. There is an important overlap in terms of data, sourcing, production, and user groups as well. So thank you very much, Mr. Longa. You have an excellent roadmap forward, and we wish you all the best with your important initiatives. Now, this item has no poll, so we will move on directly to item 5, measuring tourism industries and employment. There is very little time left for such a big, subject matter, which are in fact 2 areas of statistics that are increasingly, and especially in these times of pandemic, very important and carry important policy weight. So Leandri Moreno, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Clara. I will try to be brief. So I guess you can see my screen. So we move from the demand side of tourism to now see the supply side. At the end of this short session, we will be able to hopefully understand tourism from a supply perspective, list the main tourism industries, differentiate between tourism employment and employment in the tourism industries, distinguish between jobs and persons employed, identify the main data sources for both categories, industries and employment, and understand the key variables. So what makes tourism special is that while traditional industries are classified according to what they produce and how they produce it, tourism is defined by the demand for products by a special type of consumer, the visitor, as we have already seen. It is a demand-side phenomenon, as we have seen, as tourism refers to the activities of visitors and their role in the acquisition of goods and services. But at the same time, tourism can also be viewed from the supply side, and it will then be understood as the set of productive activities that cater mainly for visitors. However, only exceptionally can 100% of the production of a single tourism industry be attributed to visitors. For example, a travel agency will mainly cater to visitors, but also will sell for tickets to migrants, for example. So tourism supply is understood as a direct provision to visitors of the goods and services that make up tourism expenditure. So what are the tourism industries? Here we see the classification. The first 10 are used for international comparability purposes. We also see here their correspondence with the classes of the International Standard Industrial Classification of all economic activities. So here is the list of industry: accommodation for visitors, food and beverage serving activities, railway passenger transport, road, water and air passenger transport, transport equipment rental, travel agencies and other reservation service activities, cultural activities, sport and recreational activities, and then the specific to the countries, retail trade of tourism-specific tourism characteristic goods, and other country-specific tourism characteristic activities. So with regards to tourism industries, what are the basic data to measure and that we collect at UNWTO for international comparability? On tourism industry, the main data and indicators refer to the number of establishments in the following industries: so accommodation for visitor, hotel and similar establishments, food and beverage, passenger transportation, travel agency, and all the other grouped in other tourism industries. We also focus on two main industry: accommodation for visitor and travel agency, and we collect for each of them monetary data such as output, intermediate consumption, gross value added, compensation of employees, and gross fixed capital formation, and also non-monetary data. For accommodation, we see here that it refers to the number of establishments, rooms and bed places, and we have also the relevant indicators on the occupancy, average length of stay, and available capacity. And on travel agency, we focus on trips either with package tour or without package tour for the three forms of tourism. Here we can see an illustrative example of what the data could look like. So this is the data reported by Zambia. As I said before, it's just for illustration, and we can access it at the UNWTO webpage. So here we can see in particular the total number of establishments in accommodation and the number of rooms and bed places. So briefly, in terms of data sources, there are several tags. I think I've already covered most of them before, but we have the main surveys: business survey and tourism characteristic activity economic survey, administrative data such as business registers and tax records, but also the tables, the supply and use tables of the national accounts. These supply and use tables show the interface between demand for goods and services and the supply of these goods and services within an economy. Now, we are going to very briefly look at the measurement of employment in the tourism industries. In fact, there are two main conceptual measures of employment: tourism employment and employment in the tourism industry. So tourism employment refer to all jobs strictly related to the goods and services acquired by visitors and produced by either tourism industries or other industries. But we have to take it into account that labor is a factor of production and as such related to a production process, not to a product, and even less so to the consumption of a certain type of consumer. Here in tourism, it's the visitor, of course, and can be associated with the total output of an establishment, but cannot be assigned to any particular output without the use of specific assumption and modeling procedure. So therefore, tourism employment can't be directly observed. So in order to fix this, the IRTS recommends to focus on the employment in tourism industries, which refer to all jobs in the tourism industries that we have seen the classification just before, even those not related to tourism services characteristic. For example, when a restaurant offers catering services to residents. So here, the persons employed in tourism industries can be classified as paid employment or self-employment. Paid employment refers to employees who are people who works for an enterprise in return for remuneration in cash or in kind, as agreed. They can be present at the job or not at work. So what means at work? It's quite straightforward. Maybe in this time of pandemic, it's worth mentioning that at work includes, for example, persons teleworking, persons working with reduced hours, and person performing a reduced set of tasks related to their job. Not at work, for example, would include sick leave or paternity or maternity leave. Self-employed can be also at work or with an enterprise, but not at work. And this category refers to employers, own account workers, members of producers cooperative, or contributing family members. So here are the main measures. What is a job? Job is a main measure, employed person is a main measure, and we'll see also that full-time equivalent employment is a main measure. So a job is a set of tasks and duties performed or meant to be performed by a person. Of course, the intensity of work may vary from job to job, and industry to industry, and from period to period. So job may differ by working time of persons employed, and therefore be expressed in terms of part-time or full-time. But it's not, let's say, sufficient to have data on the number of jobs or person employed in order to obtain the information on the total volume of labor. What will give us the exact volume will be the measure on full-time equivalent employment. So it corresponds to the total hours actually worked by all employed persons divided by the average number of hours actually worked in full-time jobs. I imagine this is a bit complicated to understand in very short time, but we are going to see what it looks like practically here. So, of course, as they are the main measure, they are also the main data that UNWTO collects. You will find again number of employees, number of jobs, and number of full-time equivalent. For full-time equivalent, we have also a small section on sex disaggregated data. But as you can imagine, there are very few countries in the world collecting data. But here we have the opportunity to see that Zambia is part of them. So we are going to look at their very good example. Here the data from Zambia from our webpage. with sex disaggregation. Regarding data sources, so what kind of data could help to build the statistics on employment in the tourism industries? It will, of course, depend on what is possible and available in each country. But we have, for example, the labor force survey, which is the main instrument, in fact, on data collection on employment for both employees and for the self-employed population. From the supply side, the most relevant survey will be the surveys on economic activities or business surveys. Administrative data can provide relevant information, but remember that we have said before that we have to take into account that they are not specifically designed to align with the statistical concepts. So here we will have to work a bit more, the data. We can also use data from censuses, either establishment censuses or population censuses, notably for the employment and full-time equivalent data. And of course, the national account data with the full-time equivalent data in these accounts. Of course, depending on each country, it can be different. So I would like to finish this very, very brief overview on the measurement of employment by showing you two publications that UNWTO has done in collaboration with the International Labour Organization. I really encourage you to have a look at it if you want to deepen your knowledge on this subject. They are available at the UNWTO e-library. You can have access it through this link that you can see at the bottom of the slide. So I think I stop here for the sake of time, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Leandri, for summarizing so much content so effectively. Up next, we will learn about the work in Mauritius in this area with a presentation by Ms. Taslima Juman, statistician at Statistics Mauritius. Since 2014, she has been working in the Tourism Statistics Unit and has been responsible mainly for the compilation and dissemination of monthly passenger traffic data, including tourist arrivals, as well as hotel survey and the surveys of inbound, outbound, and domestic tourism. Ms. Taslima, you have the floor. I'm afraid we can't hear you, Ms. Juman, Ms. Taslima. I still, we can see your presentation, but we can't hear you. I see you are unmuted, but I don't know if perhaps Diana, you can help us out here a little bit. I don't know if this is a technical issue.
Hi, Clara, this is Diana speaking. We have tried to check the connection of Mrs. Juman before, and she had some minor problems. I'm not sure whether her technical team was able to solve it. Ms. Juman, can you hear us? Because we cannot see you, nor we can hear you at this point. We can see your presentation, but we do not hear you. I'm sorry, Clara, from our end, there's nothing we can do. I think this is an issue from their end, so I leave it up to you to decide how do you want to handle it. Thank you.
Perhaps we can give Ms. Juman just a few more seconds or a minute or so to try and sort things out with her technical team. We'll wait patiently, and otherwise we'll move on to some of the questions and come back whenever you're ready, Ms. Juman. I'm afraid we still can't hear our colleague, Ms. Juma. Why don't we do this, Diana, perhaps you can pull up the poll for this item and we get ahead with that in the meantime. Or Ms. Juma, are you there? Okay, so we'll wait still a little bit for you. In the meantime, we'll have a look at this poll. It says tourism is a sector composed of various industries. Is this true or false? Okay, I think Diana, you can start. You can take away the poll now if you haven't done so already. We still have trouble connecting to Mauritius. Perhaps. So we now lost video and audio contact with you. We will. What we can do is we can perhaps get started. Maybe you want to try and reconnect again, Mauritius, or have we? Yeah, you're welcome to try and reconnect again if you want. What we can do is have a look at the responses to the polls now. So we would sort of be heading into the next item already while we wait for our colleagues in Mauritius to try and sort out their technical issues. Okay, thank you very much, Diana. Wow, so the first question was completely perfect. Of course, you noticed very well that that indeed these are only two of the modes of transport. We also have road and rail, of course. So thank you very much, Diana. You can pull up the next one. Domestic tourism comprises the activities of a resident visitor within the country of residence. Yes, most of you got it correct. I do note that this is a tricky issue. So perhaps as we have a little bit of time and we're waiting, may I call upon my colleague Leandri to elaborate a little bit on the answer to this question, please?
Yeah, thank you very much, Clara. Yes, well, I've seen that or more than 80% of the participants replied very well. But yes, so I was mentioning in my presentation, so domestic tourism comprises the activity of a visitor within the country of residence. If he resides in the country of residence, it's independent from his nationality. I mentioned my example, in fact, as I'm French living in Spain, but if I go outside my usual environment and for less than a year, and for one of the main purpose that qualify for tourism, I will be considered in Spain as a domestic visitor, even though I'm French. I hope this clarified.
Yes, thank you very much, Leandri. I think the key element here is the usual environment. So as soon as the resident leaves the usual environment, that person would be considered a visitor. So we can have a look at the next one, please, Tiana. Thank you. And the tourism sector is a sector composed of various industries. Absolutely, absolutely true. So congratulations to our participants. You really have aced this quiz with an A. So fantastic indeed. The tourism sector is composed of various industries that my colleagues Leandri and Kepa have gone into mostly. There's a list of 10 industries identified for international comparability purposes that you may consult in the international standards. whose links we have provided in the chat. So congratulations on this poem. I will check back again with our colleagues in Mauritius to see how that is going, or perhaps Diana, you have some news on this?
Hi again, Clara. From what I can see right now at this moment, they have logged out from the Zoom, so I can only assume that they're trying to log in again and try their connection. In the meanwhile, let's continue with the program, and in case they get back and with a stable connection, we can give them support to do their presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Diana. Well, this really is a pity. We hope that the colleagues in Mauritius are able to connect back again, and we'll give them the floor as soon as they manage to do that. Of course, our workshop only lasts until 2 o'clock Madrid time, so we will be going ahead with the program indeed. And this leads us to the questions and answers. Now, I am so happy that many of you have launched your questions in the Q&A module, and that our wonderful panelists have answered all of them to this moment. What I would like to do now is to open the floor for questions. Please raise your hand if you have a question, even if you would like to elaborate a little bit more on some of the questions that may already have been answered through the Q&A function. If you raise your hand, I will give you the floor. I do note there's a new question that just popped in now in the Q&A function as well, but the floor remains open. All participants are welcome to raise their hand and to ask their question also orally. Oh, I see a raised hand from the Seychelles. Mr. Alan Renaud, please go ahead.
Sorry, I clicked it by accident, but since I did click it, I'll remove it now. What I wanted to say was about the domestic tourism. That was really interesting in terms of measuring it. I do think there's an opportunity for some technology to be used, particularly when you're looking at people getting off and on ferries, because people have to present their identity. So if we introduce a kind of sort of, as we did for international, where people sort of present a national ID card and that is being scanned at that moment, there's an opportunity for that. And that's something that we're looking at. I didn't think of it in terms of domestic tourism. It was more like an extension where we had the QR code for the international tourists, but they're traveling on the same ferries with the Seychellois. So we were trying to figure out, how do we scan the tourists along with the Seychellois? So we realized we'd have to come up with a barcode for our residents that can be read by the same system, and that we would split them. And that's some of the data. It doesn't capture anything, but I just wanted to throw that in there as a potential way of starting to get some of that data automatically, if you will.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Renaud, for that comment. And it seems like a wonderful idea and initiative. So we would very much look forward to having you present on this as soon as as soon as you have implemented that as well in a next edition of a workshop. Really, it is fantastic to be able to work together with people such as yourselves, with so much initiative and so much enthusiasm and service to their country. So thank you very much for that. I see that we have Mr. Juman back online, so let's try and get back to her. Mr. Juman, Miss Juman, can you hear me, and would you like the floor?
Hello, Clara. Unfortunately, Ms. Juman has informed me that she has a problem with her laptop, so her webcam and her audio are not working, unfortunately.
Oh, goodness. Thank you, Sarah, for that news. That is very unfortunate, and we're very sorry that this happened this way, Ms. Juman. These are the pros and the cons of working online. We do the best that we can, of course, and these are still difficult times on all of us. And we work very hard to make it work. We have fantastic technologies, but even that technology at times is not sufficient to bring us together. But we would be happy, Ms. Juma, to send around your PowerPoint, and also if you are able to record a video of your presentation, we'd be more than happy to share that also with the group. So we'll be in touch with you, and please don't worry, okay? We're happy that you did your best to make it work. What we will do now, we do have, I see Mr. Jaime Mayaki from the Regional Department of Africa is with us. We have a little bit of time. We have 5 more minutes for some questions. So if you all agree, my dear panelists, we could go into some of them. We did receive some interesting questions also from Sao Tome over email that I would like to go into because I believe they might be relevant for many more countries. So if Sao Tome is with us, you're more than welcome to pose the question yourself. Otherwise, I will read it out for you. Okay, I will read it out then. My country has a high deficit in terms of statistical measurement. The tourism sector has a department which is charged with dealing with such measures. However, we have only been able to measure some indicators. What would be the best mechanism to collect data and transform it into useful information for decision making? Now, I believe the word useful is really the key in this question. And as in any statistical exercise, it's always fundamental to start defining the main purpose and the main policy issues to thereupon be able to identify the data that you might need and that you would focus on with your statistical operations. Now, we did receive this question before the workshop, so maybe it already got answered to an important extent through the presentations. But I welcome follow-up questions from Sao Tome and of course from our panelists, any thoughts on this matter as well. And otherwise, I'll give you some time to think about it, and I'll go on to the next question from Sao Tome, which is about the tourism satellite accounts, where I will kindly invite Mr. Kevin Millington to provide some ideas on. So it says that we have the ambition to implement a tourism satellite account as a way of measuring tourism parameters. What are the concrete steps to be taken in this specific case for our country to create and implement this account? Now, there are 2 important elements in this that I can see. So one would be more the institutional part of it. So collaboration between the different various entities involved in this. And so I would like my colleague Leandri to perhaps say a little bit about this once that Kevin has finished covering the more technical elements of this question. So Kevin, if you agree, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Clara. Yes, it's an interesting question because clearly Sao Tome and Principe are setting out on the journey of TSA. It can be very daunting. We look at the manuals, we look at the number of tables we have to produce, but really it doesn't need to be so. You're a small island. I've not been. I've researched the country and it looks beautiful. I must travel there, but I believe you've got 2 islands. So as far as domestic travel goes, you can probably almost discount it. I don't know how much movement there is between the 2 islands, but I would say that domestic tourism you would probably define as movement between Sao Tome and Principe. So that is likely, I believe, to be small. So really what you've got to focus on is inbound tourism. So collecting good inbound tourism expenditure data through a visitor survey. And also, so that will look after your demand side. And then from your supply side, you can go to your national accounts data. And to reconcile these 2, the table would be table 1 and table 5. And to get to your key TSA indicators, your tourism GDP, your value added. So, it's not a big mountain to climb. You can start relatively simply. You have a relatively small destination. And I believe it's something that you can get going with straight away. So inbound visitor survey, your national accounts, and with that, you should be in business and able to get going. Thank you, Clara.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Kevin. I believe that was very useful. I will now head over to Leandri to say a few words on the importance of interinstitutional collaboration.
Yeah, thank you very much, Clara. Indeed, it was an item that we've seen yesterday, but it's good also to talk about it today. As you know, well, the production of official statistics and even more tourism statistics require the participation of several institutions. And as such, the establishment of arrangements between them to work well and to meet the needs of the user, to follow the quality standards and to disseminate the data produced in the most efficient way. So to UNWTO, we normally recommend that all institutions, either those who provide information or the users, work together for the development of tourism statistics. So for example, in terms of potential producers, of course, we have to take into account the national statistical offices, the National Tourism Administration, the Central Bank, all here, in fact, today, immigration procedures also. We have also to take into account potential users of the information, such as tourism industry representatives and the private sector, and also Ministry of Trade and Economy or Finance and Tax Authority. It will depend on the repartition of the responsibilities in each country. So what we can see that these all institutions working together, then we can see some benefits. So the benefits are usually that the development of tourism statistics or TSA is more a national project rather than a project only focused on the National Tourism Administration. The results are better legitimated and it gives greater credibility to the results. Of course, we see also that in this case, the data is disseminated more efficiently, and we can also see that there is a guarantee that the development of these statistics are sustainable on time, because a lot of stakeholders work together on it, and this, of course, make it less dependent on one specific institution or directory.
Thank you very much, Leandri. We are nearing the close of this workshop, but I don't want to let you leave, my dear panelists, without answering one final question. And this one is directed at the wonderful representatives from Seychelles and Zambia, if I may, to think about the following issue. What can we do more? So what can we do more as a statistical community? What can we do more as a policy community? And in this way, nicely wrap up also the two blocks of this workshop that we had yesterday, more focused on policy, this day more focused on statistics. So I'm seeing Mr. Alan Renaud already nodding, so please go ahead and go first. You have the floor.
Thanks, Clara. I will say, listening to Leandri's presentations, I was really, really impressed, and I didn't know that. I mean, I didn't have that language to describe what we were actually looking at. And even when, so one thing that I would recommend is, in my case, because we were dealing with several stakeholders of the data, we had immigration, we had customs, and then we had tourism. Interestingly enough, the tourism was not directly at the point of where we were collecting the statistics. So what was interesting was when we were actually asking questions and looking at the immigration questions and customs questions, we were actually looking at the laws for customs, and we're looking at conventions. We didn't actually think of statistics as you guys were presenting it today. But there were a lot of free questions as well. Like we were like, well, what kind of tourists do we, well, how do we want to classify them? Let's do weddings. Let's do honeymoons. Let's do. It would have been nice to know that 2008. So that's why, like, the minute I saw that, I'm like, oh my God, that's exactly what I want. So we're going to throw that back in there. And so I think one of the more interesting things that'll be good for us is to get more agencies to be aware of these standards. Even our National Bureau of Statistics, they present their data, I would say half and half the way that it's done as presented today. and the tourism department definitely knows it. So for me, I think an awareness of the standards and an awareness of how our contribution and our measurement of these is actually quite critical for us as a global player is really important. Because the first thing I was thinking about was I want to start compiling the data in the right way and then sending it out to wherever you guys need it. Just so, okay, this is what we're doing. Let us know if you need more. Like that's honestly the first reaction I had. And I only didn't think of that before because I didn't know it existed, like that standard the way it was. So that's my contribution to that. And of course, I'm looking forward to seeing Kevin and some of the others come down. I think it's nice to be able to sort of experiment and practice. So it'll be cool for us to see where we can take it. And so for me, we'll be delighted to learn about some of the challenges and to be used as a sort of a frontier case to see if that can be done, this can be done, and see what can happen. So on Seychelles side, we're looking forward to participating and being a valuable member of the UNWTO in terms of tourism, satellite, data contributions, and being a role model. And I'm really looking forward to it. So I really, really, really learned a lot today, a lot. And I'm looking forward to our cruise ship season and to see what we can do for Kevin next time he comes down. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Renaud. We can only share in your enthusiasm. May I go on to Mr. Longa now from Zambia, please? And would you please unmute yourself?
Thank you so much. It's been a learning experience. And I think one key message I pick out is, I know we've got this collaboration under the Balance of Payments Statistical Committee in Zambia, but then I'm just of the view that the coordination and the strength of that relationship is not as much as it should be. And I'll give you an example. If you look at the surveys which we do at the Bank of Zambia, they are we expend a lot of resources on them, but then it's like we're only covering part of the tourism statistics because our concentration is so much on travel. But what it would take to cover the comprehensive array of tourism statistics would just be to add 1 or 2 questions. And in that vein, I think if we had worked with our colleagues at Ministry of Tourism and Arts, would have had much comprehensive and broader coverage of the statistics than we are doing at the moment. So for me, I think that's a major takeaway. Then the only second point, which has sort of been going through my mind, is on data management. When I looked at the travel advisory, if I'm picking it well, I noticed it's very good at data management. And I think when we look at the way most agencies keep their statistics, we are not really at that standard. At the bank at present, we're trying to work on a data warehouse. So, and when I looked at what they've done in Seychelles, that sort of fits into that narrative of a data warehouse, and it's well put together. Though my only concern is I'm not sure what the cost, what the cost of that exercise was. I'm thinking on top of my head, it should be quite expensive. And in that vein, is there room for technical help from UNWTO, like for data management? So that's what my contribution would be. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these valuable points, Mr. Longa, as well. So if I may, from the two responses we got from both the Seychelles and Zambia, I see one common element, which is fundamental, and it's the importance of international standards in order to guarantee a minimum of international comparability to be able to benchmark between our different countries, but also to be able to integrate tourism with the way that everything else is being measured in our economies in order to have credible information and to have reinforced the credibility also of the sector itself. Now, this has been a wonderful conversation, a wonderful 2 days with all of you. Thank you so much for being with us. It's a pity that we're nearing the end of it, but I am also delighted to kindly invite my dear colleague, Ms. Elsia Grandcourt, Director of the Regional Department for Africa, to take the floor for our closing remarks. Ms. Grandcourt, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dee Clara, and thank you so much for the excellent moderate that you did since yesterday. Allow me also to thank wholeheartedly all the panel experts, all the countries that since yesterday has been sharing their best practices today as well as the two experts that are accompanying us in delivering on the tourism satellite accounts as we work with the countries. I think, as you mentioned, it has been a very enriching discussion, and I am so glad to hear the different responses that you do have the possibility of taking away some key good points out of these 2 days that we did this workshop. But it doesn't stop here. You know, for us, it has been as much as challenging as you in reaching out to our members, in getting our services on the ground, because with the pandemic, we have had various challenges. We have not been able to deploy our experts. We have had to look at new ways at how do we remain connected with you? How do we continue to bring the service to you that is so very much needed in this time? And we thank God for technology. But of course, in some countries, it is more challenging than the other. And some countries, I noticed yesterday, I think Indonesia was connecting in the middle of the night. But it shows a lot that we can take time, whatever the time, whatever the circumstances, we all try to find a way to meet together, to be able to bring our heads together and to try to look for solutions. I think this is the key about what we've been trying to do here. Of course, it goes beyond this, and that is why it is important that you remain connected with us, either through my department. We can still continue the conversation with our dear colleagues from statistics, who are also very passionate, as you've seen, with the work they do. The good thing is that they don't look only after Africa. They are looking after the other regions as well. So they are able to bring the expertise from the other areas, which I think is key here. So with that, I really want to sincerely thank you all. We will be sending you, as we mentioned, over these 2 days, all the elements that we've shared, the PPTs, etc. But if there is any specific topic that you want more in-depth information, please do tell us. You have our contacts. We've now been together for the 2 days. We can manage to continue the conversation separately or individually with each of the member states. In order to be able to assist you. So with this, Clara, I want to not only thank you and Leandri for your time, but the team behind, especially my team from RDAF. Sarah has been working tirelessly, trying to put this together. And let's not forget the platform we're using. We have a champion behind, which is Tijana with her team. She's been helping us for 1 year plus now, because we are still all working from home, as you can see. We've not been able to be together in an office proper, but we try to make it happen. And for this, we thank you for your patience. If there has been a lapse somewhere, we apologize, but I want to let you know that we are always available in any circumstances to reconnect with you. So a big thank you to everybody. And for those taking your summer break, including myself, I wish you all a happy summer break. Thank you, Clara.
Thank you very much, Elsia, for that very warm conclusion. And with this, we come to a close. Thank you very much to all, and goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.